if you rise, bring someone with you. And I can tell you, in my time of working in the women's rights movement, I have seen that. I have seen women carrying other women, doing this for other women. They're understanding that they are doing this not just for themselves, but they're actually also doing it for the generations of girls, their daughters, and others who are going to come after them.
With each episode, we're pulling back the curtain on what it really means to build a media career, break barriers, and stay true to your voice. As we mark International Women's Day 2026, the global theme Give to Gain invites us to reflect on a powerful but complex question. What does it truly mean to give? And what must change for that giving to translate into real power, equity, and justice for African women? My guest today is someone whose life's work sits at the heart of these questions. Binaifer Nowrojee is the president of the Open Society Foundations, the world's largest private funder dedicated to advancing human rights, equity, and justice. She's an international human rights lawyer whose career has spanned strategic litigation, advocacy research, and philanthropy across Africa and the Asia Pacific. Earlier in her career, she investigated sexual violence during the Rwandan genocide with Human Rights Watch, contributing to the first convictions recognizing rape as a weapon of war. Today, she continues to influence global conversations on rights, accountability, and the redistribution of power. In this episode, we explore Give to Gain and what it should mean for African women, for institutions, and for the future of gender justice on the continent. We discuss philanthropy, power, intergenerational leadership, and the role of storytelling in transforming narratives about African women. Binaifer, welcome to Her Media Diary.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you, and thank you for making the time also, because I know that you've been traveling quite a bit over the last few days. So we start every episode of this podcast by getting to know our guests, right, and learning their own kind of lived experiences right from the childhood. So, for instance, your childhood and growing up, tell us about that, starting from your earliest memories.
Okay, so my background is quite complex. I'm Kenyan, but of Indian origin. And so I've always grown up as a minority, and I always had that sense of the other from the start. And wherever I've lived, I've always been a minority. And even in the Indian community, I come from a minority religion. So very early on, I had an awareness of that difference of, yes, I'm Kenyan, but ... And it took a lot for me over the years to begin to grapple with my own identity of who I was. And so it was first my own, just getting comfortable in terms of who I was and having multiple identities. I think now there's discussion of intersectionality and having multiple identities. But there was a time where really that the sense of like, well, who are you? Where are you really from, etc. And then in terms of my other experiences, I think that I was aware very early on about the nature of injustice. I grew up in Kenya under the government of Daniel Arap Moi. That was a dictatorship. It was a very scary time in Kenya. There was silence around very serious violations that were happening, arrests, detentions without trial, abductions, torture cells. And so this kind of understanding what it is like to live under a dictatorship was very much part and parcel of my formative years. It was also the moment of apartheid, anti-apartheid movement, and the idea of struggle, of African solidarity, of growing up. I remember just also being very well aware of South African exiles and even the this kind of sense that Africa was fighting. It was a moment of African struggle. And within Kenya, I actually was very close to the pro-democracy movement at its inception. My father was one of a few lawyers that began to take cases to court, that began to come into the courtroom asking for people who had disappeared to be produced. And little by little, that began the process of breaking that silence. And I have lived through the experience of seeing how a dictatorship can be transformed into democracy. and how it takes a few courageous people and a lot of persistence. But today, Kenya is nowhere near where it was. And in that regard, I think I really was shaped by that sense of the ability to fight against injustice. I think my own home played a big role in it as well. My parents were very supportive of whatever we, the girls, wanted to do. It was not a house that discriminated. Both my mother and father were role models. They were people who filled the house with books. And I grew up just surrounded with books, and all the usual books that African middle class grew up with, the Enid Blytons and that perception of your childhood experience. But I also was exposed to African women writers, including African. There was this African writer series we studied for O levels, A levels, and so I got exposed very early on. Sembene Osman, Wole Soyinka, Mariam Abba, Nawal El Sadawi, Doris Lessing. These were all writers that shaped my own awareness of the different African experiences. And I was very much seeped in that as I grew up. And then I went to college in the United States. I was denied admission to the University of Nairobi because of my father's perceived anti-government activities. And many years later, the vice chancellor told my father, I'm really sorry we couldn't take your daughter. We had instructions. And so that opened a whole new chapter of my life in a different place. I got on a plane and I went to college with one suitcase. At that time, no foreign currency. It was very highly restricted, no cell phones, no credit cards. And I got to the US with one suitcase and started college. And there was a divestment movement to begin to push the college to get out of investments in South Africa. And in my senior year, I played a very key role in taking over the president's office, in blocking the board meetings, in calling for divestment from South African investments. And so I really began to find my own voice in terms of speaking out against injustice. So before that, I had been an observer. I'd seen all these things. And college was my own awakening. And I discovered a whole new set of writers, people like Audre Lorde, who, again, opened my awareness to what it is like to be a feminist, to speak out, to take on that mantle of responsibility to be part of something bigger. And so thus my sort of feminist identity was born. And so, I started to begin to speak out, to begin to use my own voice. And there's a very good quote by Audre Lorde that says, when I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I'm afraid. And the only thing more frightening than speaking your truth is not speaking. And so really began my own career then. And I went into, after law school, I went into public interest law. I started working with a group called the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights. Then for 10 years, I worked with Human Rights Watch. And there I actually started with a new unit called the Women's Rights Project. And at Human Rights Watch, even the idea of doing women's rights was new at that time. It was still considered something very avant-garde to consider women's rights as human rights. And even within the organization, we were a small, somewhat to the side unit. And I began to work on domestic violence and then documenting sexual violence. And that ultimately led to it was really a moment of opening. International law was widening and deepening for women's rights. You had the Nairobi conference, you had the Vienna conference in 1993 that acknowledged, governments acknowledged women's rights or human rights. And this all sounds so benign right now, but then it was revolutionary. Up to that point, women's rights really had not seriously been seen to be human rights. So in that regard, then my work in the Rwanda tribunal was really, I spent 10 years pushing for sexual violence to be charged as a crime under international law. And that included then looking at witness statements, testifying as an expert witness, training investigators and prosecutors on how to interview rape victims. So much of my life has been spent in the service of trying to ensure justice for women victims of violence. And now my latest chapter is at the Open Society Foundations. I'm the president of a philanthropy that promotes human rights, equity, and justice. So my work continues now in a different way as an ally supporting the struggles through grants and investments of organizations around the world who are advocating for voices for women.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about your role at Open Society, but I also want to just take a few steps back to acknowledge the fact that your journey has led you to where you are spending your career around advancing human rights, equity, justice across continents. So when you hear the theme, give to gain, what does that mean to you personally, given what your journey and where you are now?
First and foremost, when I hear give to gain, I think of all the remarkable, brave women who I see and have interacted with on the front lines. Women who have been principled, who've been courageous, who've dared to speak, who've stood up, sometimes at great risk to their own lives. And they've given to make gains for themselves and others. And so I see my role now at Open Society Foundations as standing with them, as standing as an ally. I don't see our work, we're not saviors. We're certainly not saving anybody, but we are standing in support of people who are taking the risks to speak out. And one of the first things that I did when I took over as president of Open Society Foundations in 2024 is we announced a Women's Leadership Fund of $25 million. And before that, we had provided $100 million to the United Nations efforts around women.
And, speaking about your experience as president of Open Society Foundations, you oversee the world's largest philanthropic networks, right? So how has your understanding of giving evolved in that time?
So I would say that, first of all, there are many firsts for me. I'm the first woman president of Open Society Foundations in its 40-plus year history. I'm the first one from the Global South and the first from Africa. So there's many firsts here. And my leadership, obviously, just because of my own lived experience, my own outlook on life, I will be a different leader, a different type of leader. And so I think that when I think about how what I bring to my leadership, I hope that I bring the experience of people in those places and from those struggles that I myself emerged from in Kenya many years ago, and that the empathy and compassion that I have is to understand, and that part of this is trusting the people on the ground, listening to the voices of what people say they need, and not coming in from on high or, parachuting in with an idea of what's best. And so the idea that affected communities know best how to fix themselves, that we're not fixing anything, that they will find the solutions. Our role at Open Society really is to support those voices and to look for the people, the women, others who basically that are coming with the imagination and the new ideas, and who are really leading the way for a future world. And within that, I think this is a field where it is communal, it is togetherness. Last year at this time, I gave a lecture at the University of Cape Town, and I closed it by quoting Charlotte Maxeke, who had founded the Bantu Women's League. several decades before the apartheid struggle emerged. And she had led a movement of women who were resisting the racist pass laws. And her quote, which I really love, she said, "This work is not for yourself. Kill that spirit of self. Do not live above your people, but live with them. If you rise, bring someone with you." And I can tell you, in my time of working in the women's rights movement, I have seen that. I have seen women carrying other women, doing this for other women. They're understanding that they are doing this not just for themselves, but they're actually also doing it for the generations of girls, their daughters, and others who are going to come after them. And so there's a real sense that we are making strides, not just for our generation, but for others.
Absolutely. And from your perspective, what would it look like for African women to gain power, resources, and influence in proportion to what they contribute? And that selflessness that you've described.
Part of it is to think about where those blockages are. So some of it is structural, some of it is culture, some of it is access to finance or access to education opportunity. Wherever it is, we want to make sure that women have a seat at the table and that doors are able to open for them. So one example that we are working with is the former Liberian president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. So we help support Amuje initiative, where some 40 women political leaders are being trained, building networks and resources to help them address a variety of different issues. And what we found actually right now, we have at Open Society, we have a program for protection of human rights defenders. And we find that the biggest, the most targeted defenders right now are environmental defenders and women. Women who come into positions of power get incredible amounts of abuse and harassment online, but also physically and otherwise. And how do we help them to stay there? How do we help them to not just get into power, but how do we help retain their ability to stay in power? What we find is women who actually come into politics and take political office step down after the first term. They don't stay because these attacks are so heavy and the strain on their families, themselves, it's just too much. So, we used to speak of glass ceilings. We're beyond glass ceilings now, but actually we're seeing glass cliffs for women political leaders. And that's the next line of struggle that we have to address.
Yeah, and as you kind of share these stories, it's really astonishing that we're seeing a reversal of women's rights in many ways, aren't we? And that's quite, especially what, and I'm in some spaces where people feel that actually, in fact, I was in a meeting last week when, somebody said, well, women feel empowered now. And so what are we doing about the young boys? And that's not to say we shouldn't be looking after the young boys, but there's this sense in which we've done that now, we've achieved that now. So let's move on. And I think the many stories that we see on the ground suggest there's still a lot more to do. So from a global philanthropy perspective, what does meaningful giving to African women's movements actually require beyond funding, especially as we're seeing a changing landscape around funding?
So first of all, I think we have to acknowledge that part of the backlash against gender and in terms of women's achievements is in fact very much part and parcel due to the successes we've had. Much has been done to promote and get women opportunities and resources to do much more than they did, even half a century ago. And that backlash is something that, I think we have to recognize that it's a threat and it's dangerous, but it's also in response to successes that we've had. We also now are in a rapidly changing world. Not only do we face a global backlash against women's rights, but we are seeing all kinds of other threats in this world that are emerging that we couldn't have even imagined. Everything from online and internet, AI, climate change, etc., and just a growing inequality in the world. And so what does meaningful giving mean for African women's movements? I think what it means is that we have to find the women who really have the moral imagination to envision a future world that promotes rights and equity and justice. Where are those young women or women who have the courage to speak out? How can we support them? How can we connect them as individuals and groups? How can we convene them to allow them to strategize together, to work together? And really, how can we make sure that in all of these changes that are coming forward, that we keep women's rights on the agenda, that feminism is something that we should be proud of that struggle and we should keep it coming. And I see it. With our new Gen Z. And this is not a new thing. When the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was being crafted 80 years ago, one of the crucial contributions came from an Indian feminist women's rights campaigner and freedom fighter. Her name was Hansa Mehta. And at that time, she said, to create a new world, it's necessary to create a new way of thinking. And I think we're at that moment right now. We need to be imagining a future world that is beyond where we are right now. The world that we've had since the Second World War has taken us this far, but is now no longer meeting the needs. And especially within the African continent, where we have a huge demographic of young women who are coming up. They are basically getting access to education in ways that they never had before. And I see their energy, I see their enthusiasm, and I see these Gen Z women really being called on to create a new moral imagination and to provide the leadership. And so I think that I have great hope that younger women are going to lead us to a new world.
Hello, Her Media Diary listeners. Permit me to introduce to you the Kigali Declaration on the Elimination of Gender Violence in and through Media in Africa. It's a groundbreaking commitment to address the forms of gender violence experienced by women in media and how media reports on gender-based violence. So whether you sign up as an individual or as an organization, it is a sign that you are pledging to consciously play your role in tackling this important issue and working towards creating safer and more inclusive work environments for everyone. Imagine a media landscape that treats every story with balance and every voice with dignity. By adopting the Kigali Declaration, it's not just a commitment, it's a powerful step towards social change. And that change starts with us. So if you are ready to take that bold step and make that social change, visit our website at africanwomeninmedia.com/declaration to read the declaration, to commit to it, and to begin to take action. And how might we as African women and younger African women move from being simply recipients of aid to actually shaping the philanthropic agenda?
So I think that part of it is getting more women from all parts of the world into these philanthropies. And as I told you myself, I'm a first. For somebody who has had a life story like myself, who looks like me, who has the experience that I've had growing up, that alone is something new, and having different types of people there. But I think it's also more than that. It's also about making space to ensure that women have the ability to get there. I feel like we now are seeing role models that we didn't have. We see in Mexico how mandated political positions for women have led us to a female president, Claudia Sheinbaum, who really does uphold the issue of women's rights issues and indigenous rights. We are seeing in Namibia, the president is a woman, the vice president a woman, Speaker of Parliament is a woman, and now we have somebody on the Supreme Court in Namibia who's female. So these are the stories that we need to tell, and we need to use them to inspire others to step up.
Yeah, and to demonstrate where there's a will, there's always a way, right? So,
Totally.
and so what forms of giving from governments and institutions would produce that greatest gain for gender justice in Africa, would you say?
So some of this is not even about giving anything, because women are not begging for anything. They just want an equal place, right? So for starters, just making sure that they have access to whatever it is that other citizens have is the first step. And then the other thing is to make sure that they are given the ability to access it. In so many ways, as a young girl, you're told you cannot do so many things. Those messages which impact us as we grow up. You can't play sports, you can't do this, you can't do that. Even that, to just get out of people's way, young women's way, and say, you can do whatever you want. If you can dream it, you can be it. And I think that those messages, which are just as important as having, the ability to go to school or the money, that determination, that confidence that you get as a young person, the importance of that, I think, is really key. And then that doesn't let government off the hook. Governments do need to make sure women have access to education. They do need to make sure that there's policy decisions that are made that provide access to women. And in places, as I said, where there's mandates on where women have to be part of the political structures, we see the difference, we see the benefit of that. Be it in India at the local levels, to Mexico, where women's participation in politics all the way up to president is mandated.
Yeah, and you highlighted the importance of media representation, essentially, and storytelling, right? So, from your perspective and given your experiences, how can storytelling itself become a form of giving that generates those tangible gains for the women's movements?
So, first of all, I think Chimamanda Adichie's The Danger of a Single Story is so live for us in Africa, because really few of us we are seeing, this next generation gets to see and hear from all sorts of Africans, not just war-torn Africans, not just the portrayal of how the Western media shows us. And I think the more those are shared and told, the importance of what you're doing right now is so incredible, because who tells the story and how it's told is so important. It's not just the story, it's also who shapes it and who tells it. And so I think the fact that there are podcasts such as these, which stop Africa from being one-dimensional, that give us context and color and depth, and even to say, oh my goodness, look at that, an African who's of Indian origin, somebody with multiple identities who still has an African story to tell. And my African story is as valid as your African story, because why? There's no one African story.
Absolutely. And you spoke there about Gen Z and younger women and that importance of intergenerational dialogue and exchange and collaboration. So how do you see that intergenerational collaboration producing those gains and that we can't just achieve alone?
Again, change is a collective act, and we can only stand to gain from learning from each other, from listening to each other, from basically putting our hands out to help and also lift up others. The intergenerational conversation is a very interesting one right now, because the world is shifting so much that activists who came up in a world 20, 30 years ago are now living in a world that 20, 30 years from now will look so completely different. And so you could say, okay, we have nothing to teach or learn from younger Gen Z activists, but that's actually not true. Because I think that there's gains to be made from both sides. There's something about bringing that combination together that's important. And I'll tell you, when I see it again with Gen Z organizing in social media spaces and ways that I, as an activist, younger activist, I grew up without the internet, without any of that. But when Gen Z, when police open fire on Gen Z protesters, where is it that people come and give support? It's the legal aid groups that my generation helped create and support. It's the medical groups that go and help people or get people who do the autopsies in the morgues, from the morgues, to help to show that there was disproportionate police violence. So that intersectional connection, as you say, is really what makes us stronger. Each generation will bring its strengths. And even as we have things to teach, we must also be humble to recognize we have things to learn. our Gen Z activists, they are so courageous and they have really put themselves on the line, and they're showing us new ways of organizing, and how we can help support them, I think, is really an important question for those of us who have been in the feminist movement for a while.
Absolutely, as you made that point earlier on, that we have a youthful population across the continents, so it's really important that we're taking the youth along with us. And if we're to think about defining what give to gain means on our own terms as African women, what might that vision look like?
I think what that vision will look like is beautiful, dynamic, smart, and talented African women putting their heads together, putting their hands together to do whatever it is they are called to do as their passion, and lifting this continent in so many different ways. And you know what? There's millions of those women. You see them every day. They could even be a market woman who is doing everything to make sure their kids get to school. It could be a woman politician who is bringing a law into parliament. It's a woman artist who's performing theater. Again, there's so many ways in which it manifests itself. And as long as there's passion, commitment, and really a bent towards improving women's lives and really thinking of a world that upholds a shared humanity, that's what it looks like to me. And it's not about dependence. It's not about being saved. It's not all those stories we see about the sad and bad. Of course, those things are there, but it's that spirit. And I see it a lot.
Absolutely. And to round us off today, looking into the future, what is one thing institutions like philanthropic organizations, what would you say they must be willing to give up in order for women to truly gain?
I think philanthropy has to come with humility and must always have a listening ear. We are at a moment where the future of the world and how it will manifest itself is unclear. We want to find the people with the moral clarity and imagination who are going to take our world into that next leap. And we need to find people with courage, because it's a scary time, people with courage. And how can we help them, support them, protect them, strengthen them in whatever way? But the first starts with listening.
Thank you so much, Binaifer, for your time this evening. It's been a pleasure speaking with you and hearing about your experiences. And, it's so amazing what you're achieving and what you've been doing. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you. And thanks for having me.
My sincere thanks to Binaifer Nowrojee for helping us unpack the deeper implications of this year's International Women's Day theme, and for reminding us that meaningful gain for women requires structural change, not just celebration. As we commemorate International Women's Day, may we all reflect on what we are willing to give and what we must demand to ensure that African women truly gain. If you found today's conversation inspiring, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. If you'd like to join me on an episode of the podcast, send me an email at yemisi@africanwomenmedia.com and visit our website, hermediadiary.com. And don't forget, join the conversations using the hashtag #HerMediaDiary. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and keep amplifying the stories that truly matter.